When we enter the realm of human relationships, we step beyond the rigid boundaries of logic and into the fluid, magnetic field of the unconscious. There, in the subtle vibrations of the soul, archetypes speak not through language, but through attraction, compulsion, and repetition. You might believe you choose your lovers, your friends, your enemies, but I would contend that most of your choices were made long before you consciously arrived at them. And that is nowhere more true than in the relationship between the narcissist and the empath. This union is not random. It is not the result of coincidence or mere chemistry. It is an alchemical bond designed by the architecture of the psyche, but do not mistake design for conscious planning. The architect here is the unconscious itself, and when the unconscious designs something, it does so with symbols, with shadows, with forgotten memories and mythic forces that shape your life as if from behind a veil. You see, the empath and the narcissist are not merely roles played by people in some modern psychological drama. They are archetypal polarities. They are the light and the shadow of a single psychic pattern. The empath is a light bearer, the one who feels, absorbs, understands, and longs to heal. The narcissist is the mask wearer, the one who projects, manipulates, controls, and hungers for validation. But both are trapped. Both are bound by the same wound, the same primal longing to be seen by the other. Only they react to that wound in opposite ways. The empath becomes hyper-attuned to others in order to earn love through sacrifice. The narcissist becomes hardened to others, demanding love through domination. But the origin is the same, a fracture in the mirror of selfhood, and it is this shared fracture that draws them together with a magnetic pull so deep, so irrational, that it feels fated. In my years observing the unconscious and studying dreams, I have seen this pattern emerge time and time again, not only in relationships, but in the inner landscapes of my patients. A woman dreams of entering a vast, crumbling cathedral where a child cries out from behind the altar. While a cloaked figure watches in silence, she is torn. Should she run to the child or confront the dark figure? The dream, she tells me, disturbs her deeply. She believes she is the child seeking rescue. But no, I tell her, you are all three. You are the cathedral, abandoned yet sacred. You are the child wounded and in need. And you are the cloaked figure, the shadow self, the manipulator, the one who watches and controls. This, I say, is the triangle of your soul. The empathic woman thinks she is merely the rescuer, but she has forgotten the parts of herself she has exiled into shadow. This is the secret of why narcissists find empaths so easily. The narcissist is drawn without knowing why to those whose wounds complement their own, but who are less defended. The empath's heart is exposed. They have not grown armor, only sensitivity. And the narcissist unconsciously seeks not just a victim but a mirror that reflects what they refuse to see in themselves. This is not seduction. This is archetypal possession. When an archetype possesses the psyche, you are no longer acting, you are being acted upon. The narcissist does not wake up and say, I shall find an empath today to drain their soul. Nor does the empath say, let me sacrifice myself upon the altar of this person's endless need. No, they are both moving along mythic tracks, like characters in a dream. Unaware, they are sleepwalking through a ritual older than time. There is in this dynamic the echo of the ancient myth of Echo and Narcissus. But most people tell that myth incorrectly. They think Narcissus fell in love with himself because he was vain. But the truth is deeper. Narcissus did not know himself. He had never truly seen his own soul. The reflection in the water was not vanity, it was longing. And Echo, she had no voice of her own, only the ability to repeat the words of others. Her identity was formed around the other's desire. Is that not the empaths, stripped of their own voice, always answering, never initiating? So here we are, once again, reenacting the myth. The narcissist sees their reflection in the empath's gaze, not their real self, never that, but the glorified, idealized projection of what they wish to be. The empath, in turn, sees the wounded child inside the narcissist and believes their love can heal it. But neither sees the whole truth. What binds them is not love, it is the shadow. The shadow, as I have written, is the rejected, repressed, and unlived side of the personality. It is the part you hide from the world and from yourself. For the narcissist, the shadow contains vulnerability, need, and helplessness. For the empath, the shadow often contains rage, boundaries, and self-worth. But because neither wishes to own these disowned fragments, they project them onto one another. The narcissist projects their vulnerability onto the empath and then attacks it. The empath projects their anger onto the narcissist and then fears it. They are caught in each other's unconscious. That is the true intimacy, not the conscious attraction, but the unconscious fusion. You may ask, how does one break free of such a design? But that is not the question. The design cannot be escaped until it is seen, and to see it, you must descend into the depths of your own psyche. You must enter the labyrinth. In dreams, I often saw this pairing appear as a dance. A dreamer would tell me of being in a grand ballroom filled with mirrors where they are locked in a waltz with a figure whose face keeps changing, now a lover, now a parent, now a stranger. The music is haunting. They try to stop dancing, but their feet will not obey. This is not just a dream of love, it is a dream of possession. The mirrors are the projections. The ballroom is the unconscious. The dance is the pattern, and the changing face, that is the archetype of the manipulative other, wearing the masks of those who once wounded us. But here is the most important revelation. The empath too wears a mask. It is a noble mask. Yes, a healer, a giver, a light worker, but it is still a mask. And until the empath sees their own capacity for shadow, until they stop defining themselves only by how much pain they can absorb, they will be trapped. There is an unconscious pride in martyrdom. I have seen it. A patient says, I keep giving, but they never appreciate me. And I ask, why must you give so much? Who taught you that your worth is in your suffering? Often they weep, not because they had never heard the question, but because they had never dared to answer it. You must understand, when the empath meets the narcissist, it is not a mistake, it is a summons, a call to individuation. Individuation is the process by which a person becomes whole, not perfect, but whole. It requires confrontation with the shadow. It requires withdrawal of projections. It requires the courage to enter your own underworld and retrieve the lost fragments of your soul. That is what the empath must do. And ironically, it is what the narcissist must also do, but they are less likely to answer the call. The narcissist fears the truth of their own brokenness. The empath fears the truth of their own power. Power without consciousness becomes domination. But power with consciousness becomes healing. Therefore, if you find yourself repeating this dynamic, do not ask, why are they doing this to me? Ask instead, why does this pattern feel so familiar? The answer lies not in your intellect, but in your body, in the memories you carry not just from childhood, but perhaps from generations. In the collective unconscious, we carry ancestral wounds. We are not born blank slates. We are born into psychic fields already shaped by those who came before us. And perhaps, Idare say, this is why you were chosen, not by the narcissist, but by the self. The self, in Jungian psychology, is the central organizing principle of the psyche. It is the totality, not just the ego, but the unconscious, the shadow, the anima, the animus, all held together in a dynamic whole. The self seeks to awaken you, and often it does so through suffering. The narcissist may appear as a villain, but perhaps they are an initiator, a dark teacher sent to break your identification with the wounded healer archetype. You see, we do not grow by being comfortable. We grow by being confronted. The empath must confront the illusion that love equals sacrifice, that to be good is to be empty, that boundaries are unspiritual. These are lies born of trauma, dressed in the costume of virtue. The truth is that real love includes self-love. Real compassion includes truth. And real healing begins when you stop trying to save others and begin listening to your own soul. The narcissist, if they were to awaken, would have to confront the illusion that admiration is love, that control is safety, that grandiosity is strength. But such a confrontation requires the dismantling of the ego's false temple. Few are ready, but you, perhaps, that is why you are here. Let us pause here. Let us breathe together. Let us remember that behind every psychological concept is a living mystery. The dance between Narcissist and Empath is not merely a dysfunction. It is a portal, a place where shadow meets light, where trauma seeks transmutation, where the unconscious reaches out to be known. And now I invite you not to run from the pattern, but to turn toward it, to ask not why does this keep happening to me, but what is this trying to show me about myself? When we consider the empath's path, we must go beyond the surface symptoms of overgiving and begin instead to penetrate the mythic wound at the core of their being. This wound is not a flaw. It is not a defect to be repaired. It is, in fact, sacred. It is through this wound that the light first entered them, but the light did not enter gently. It pierced, it shattered, and in the shattering, something else was born: sensitivity. Sensitivity is not simply the ability to feel, it is the capacity to perceive what lies beneath, to sense the tremors of the soul beneath another's voice, to hear the echo in what has been left unsaid. Yet, without a container, sensitivity becomes suffering. The empath, having never been taught to hold their own inner world, becomes flooded by the world of others. Now let us consider the origin. In childhood, the empath was often attuned not to play or joy, but to danger, to tension, to the moods of an unpredictable parent, to the silent war between spoken words and unspoken truths. The empath learned early that survival meant scanning the emotional atmosphere for shifts. They became seismographs of other people's pain, long before they even knew what their own emotions meant. Their inner world became structured around this attunement, which, though adaptive at the time, left them with an unconscious belief: I must abandon myself in order to stay connected to others. This is the primal covenant of the empath, and it is this very unconscious agreement that makes them vulnerable to the narcissist, not because they are weak, but because they have forgotten themselves. In symbolic terms, we could say the empath is the wounded healer, the archetype of Chiron, Chiron, the centaur of myth, was struck by a poisoned arrow and could never fully heal. Yet from his wound emerged the gift of medicine, of empathy, of transformation. But he, too, suffered in silence, tending to others, while his own pain festered beneath the surface. You see, the empath is not simply a nice person. They are a bearer of ancestral suffering, a vessel in which generational grief, family secrets, and unconscious patterns converge. The empath is often the one in the lineage who feels too much, not because they are excessive, but because they are open. They are psychic portals, emotional translators, mystics in disguise. And the narcissist, they are often the one who has closed themselves entirely to feeling the other end of the same ancestral thread. One receives too much, the other shuts it out entirely. Both are manifestations of trauma's legacy. Let me take you now into the dreamscape of one such empath. She came to me shaken after a series of failed relationships. She told me she always saw the best in her partners, only to be betrayed, dismissed, or emotionally consumed, I asked her to describe her most recent dream. In it, she was holding a lantern, walking alone through a snowy forest. She kept calling out someone's name, but no voice responded. Finally, she arrived at a frozen lake beneath the ice. She saw a wolf staring back at her, eyes burning. She dropped the lantern and ran. I told her, there lies your shadow. The wolf is her own wildness, her own anger, her own intuition. The ice is her repression. She lights the way for others. Yes, but she is afraid of what lives beneath her own surface. And yet, it is that very energy that the narcissist is drawn to. Not to her weakness, but to her fire, her openness, her capacity to feel what they cannot. The narcissist is not empowered by their confidence. They are hollowed by it. It is a performance, a script memorized long ago, usually in childhood, when they too faced abandonment, ridicule, or neglect. But instead of feeling it, they built a fortress around their wound. That fortress is the persona, the ideal self, the false identity constructed to ensure they never again feel small. And thus, their entire relational strategy becomes not to connect, but to dominate, not to bond, but to control the narrative in which they are always the admired one, the center, the source of light. And so, when they meet an empath, it feels inevitable. The narcissist says, at last, someone who makes me feel seen. The empath says, at last, someone I can help. But what neither of them understands is that they are about to reenact a sacred drama, not of healing, but of projection. The narcissist projects their shame onto the empath and attacks it in them. The empath projects their worth onto the narcissist and seeks to recover it from their approval. Both become trapped in a hall of mirrors, reflecting back not reality, but the illusions of their wounds. What is most tragic and most transformative is that at first the bond feels euphoric. The narcissist offers the empaths something intoxicating, attention, intensity, admiration. It mimics love, but it is possession. The narcissist sees the empath not as a separate being, but as an extension of their self-image. And the empath, starved for being seen, accepts the role until they begin to disappear inside it. This disappearance is subtle. It is not dramatic. It is quiet. The empath stops speaking up. They excuse behavior. They doubt their perceptions. They give more, trying to restore harmony. But the more they give, the more the narcissist takes. This is not because the narcissist is evil, but because they are unconscious. They are acting out their unhealed wound, trying to absorb the light. They feel they lack, but the light cannot be stolen. It must be cultivated from within. In analytical terms, we can understand this bond through the concept of anima and animus, the inner feminine and masculine principles that live within us all. The empath often carries an overdeveloped anima, nurturing, feeling, relational, intuitive. The narcissist often over-identifies with the distorted animus, dominating, controlling, rationalizing, and disconnected from vulnerability. These principles are meant to be integrated within the psyche, but when they are split and projected outward, they create imbalance. The empath believes the narcissist holds the missing piece. The narcissist believes the empath will feed the inner void, but both are mistaken. The solution is not to fix the other, but to reclaim the projection. To the empath, I say this: the love you seek from them is the love you have withheld from yourself. The attention you crave is a mirror for the gaze you have not turned inward. The boundaries you fear setting are the very ones that protect your soul from fragmentation. And to the narcissist, though they are less likely to listen, I would say this: the control you demand is a mask for your helplessness. The praise you chase is a substitute for presence. The persona you wear is a prison, not a shield. You cannot be loved if you cannot be seen. And you cannot be seen until you let the mask fall. You may ask, but why does this pattern repeat? Because it is not complete. Because the lesson has not been fully integrated. Because the self, that wise center of your psyche, will continue to send you the same archetype in different clothing until you no longer fall into trance. But wake up, and waking up is painful. It means seeing not only the other's manipulation, but your own participation, your own belief that suffering is noble, that being needed is the same as being loved, that empathy is limitless. But empathy without discernment is not compassion, it is martyrdom. And martyrdom is often a hidden form of control. If I suffer enough, they will change. If I give enough, they will love me. If I disappear enough, they will see me. But they will not, because the narcissist cannot see you until you see yourself, and the empath cannot see themselves until they stop looking only through the eyes of others. This is the invitation of individuation, not to become perfect, but to become whole, not to banish the shadow, but to integrate it, not to escape the wound, but to descend into it and retrieve the medicine hidden there. And so I say again, this union is not accidental. It is designed by the unconscious, by the archetypal intelligence within you that longs not for comfort, but for completion. The narcissist and the empath are not enemies. They are initiators, mirrors, teachers of a lesson that can only be learned when you stop asking, why them? And begin asking, why me? Now you are not being punished. You are being summoned to reclaim your voice, your fire, your boundaries, your joy, summoned to see that you are not broken. You are becoming that the pain is not senseless. It is symbolic, that the pattern is not a prison. It is a portal, and that portal awaits. We shall travel further into the inner marriage of Anima and Animus, into the role of dreams. In breaking this trance, and into the mystical path of integration that transforms pain into purpose. But for now, I leave you with a question that may follow you like a shadow, or perhaps like a guide. What within you keeps choosing to be chosen by pain? Do not answer with your mind, sit with it. Let the answer rise from your body, from your dreams, from the quiet space beneath all the roles you've played. The self is waiting. There is a moment, delicate and terrible, in every empath's journey, when they no longer recognize themselves in the mirror of the narcissist's gaze. A moment when the reflection begins to distort. What once felt like adoration begins to suffocate. What once shimmered as intensity now echoes with manipulation. And the empath, that soul, so attuned to others, begins to hear a strange voice rising from within, quiet, unfamiliar, and trembling with truth. It says, "This is not love," and yet how difficult it is to leave what feels destined. The bond between Narcissist and Empath is not one of logic. It is a psychic spell, a fusion of archetypes forged in the unconscious and rooted in childhood myths. The empath, deep within, often believes they were born to rescue. The narcissist believes they must be adored or they will disappear. And so their souls dance not because they are whole, but because they are unfinished. To break such a trance, one must descend deeper than diagnosis. We must turn to the inner marriage, the sacred union of Anima and animus. For you see, within each of us, there are inner figures, the Anima, the soul image of the feminine, the animus, the soul image of the masculine. These figures are not bound to gender. They are energies, archetypes, bridges to the deeper self. When undeveloped, these figures act as tyrants. The unconscious animus in the empath, for example, may whisper, "You must be needed to be worthy. Serve, forgive, endure." The undeveloped anima in the narcissist may seduce with promises of glory, beauty, endless admiration. But these voices are not the true inner guides. They are distorted echoes, shadows, masquerading as gods. The empath, in a state of projection, may see the narcissist as the animus incarnate, powerful, confident, masculine, decisive. But this is not integration. It is infatuation. And the narcissist sees the empath as anima made flesh, sensitive, radiant, nurturing, but not as a sovereign soul, only as an extension. Both are in love, not with the other, but with a lost piece of themselves. This is why the longing is so intense. It is not the person you crave, it is your own wholeness. Glimpsed in their eyes, then snatched away. Dreams often reveal this dynamic before waking life. Dares to name it. A man dreams he is trying to reach a castle on a hill, but each time he climbs, the staircase crumbles. A woman dreams she is giving birth to a child, only to find it has no face. These are not random, these are messages. The castle is the self crumbling under false strategies. The faceless child is the undeveloped inner being, lost in the projections of the outer world. The work then is to retrieve these figures from the external realm and bring them home, to reclaim the animus from the narcissist, to withdraw the anima from the empath, to stop worshipping in another's temple and instead return to your own inner sanctuary. This is not easy. Withdrawal of projection is among the most painful tasks in all of psychospiritual work. It feels like death, and in a sense, it is the death of illusion. But what rises in its place is vision. When the empath begins to see the narcissist not as an idealized twin flame or karmic partner, but as a reflection of their own inner fragmentation, something radical happens. They stop trying to save and begin to see. They stop absorbing and begin to listen to themselves. They start noticing the small betrayals of their own body, the clenching stomach, the racing heart, the quiet voice. They silence to keep the peace. And from this noticing, sovereignty is born. Sovereignty is not coldness. It is not withdrawal from love. It is the ability to remain in your center, even as the world around you tries to pull you off course. The empath learns to ask not what do they need from me, but what is my truth in this moment? And that question becomes a compass, a torch in the forest of confusion. For the narcissist, if they dare to awaken, the path is steeper. It requires a collapse, not externally, but internally, a collapse of the persona, the false self they have constructed like a castle in the air. It means admitting vulnerability, weakness, shame. It means stepping down from the pedestal and sitting, perhaps for the first time, in the quiet agony of their own unhealed wound. I have seen such transformations. Rare, yes, but real. When the narcissist stops feeding on mirrors and begins to look inward, what emerges is not a monster, but a child, terrified, tender, and terribly alone. And it is this child that holds the key. For the narcissist, like the empath, is frozen in a moment of developmental rupture. Both have built their identities around survival strategies. Both are hungry for love, but only when they meet the child within, not with pity, but with presence, can they begin to transform. And yet, even if the narcissist never awakens, the empath can. The transformation of the empath is not dependent on the redemption of the other. That is an illusion born of the wounded healer. The empath believes, if I just love them enough, they will change. But this belief is a bypass, a way of avoiding the true question. What within me is drawn to those who cannot love me back? This is where the real work begins. Not in changing the other, but in understanding the self, in tracing the thread of your suffering, not to them, but to the first moment you believed you had to earn love, that first ache, that first abandonment, that first betrayal of your own soul. In analytical work, we call this the sacred wound. It is the original psychic injury from which your personality took shape, and like the philosopher's stone, it holds the potential for transmutation, but only if faced directly. To face it, we must enter the underworld of the psyche. You will not find this underworld on any map. It does not exist in time or space, but in symbol and sensation. You might encounter it as a dream of drowning, as an overwhelming emotional wave, as a sudden collapse of meaning, but whatever form it takes, it signals the descent, the beginning of the night sea journey, and it is in this darkness that you find the forgotten parts of yourself. Here, the empaths may encounter rage they have disowned in order to remain likable. They may meet ambition, sexuality, fierceness, parts they were told were too much. But these parts are not dangerous. They are power buried under shame. Likewise, the narcissist may find grief, tenderness, need, parts they were shamed for as children. And these parts, too, are not weakness. They are the soul's call for reintegration. To integrate the shadow is to become luminous, not because you erase the dark, but because you no longer fear it. You see it, name it, hold it, and in doing so, you become whole. This is the real alchemy, not turning lead into gold, but turning unconscious suffering into conscious wisdom, turning projection into perception, turning trauma into transformation. And now we return, not with answers, but with symbols, for it is symbols, not logic, that heal the soul. The narcissist may appear in a dream as a tyrant king, a séducteur sorcier, a cold mirror. The empath may appear as a healer maiden, a weeping priest, a sacrificial lamb. But when the dream begins to shift, when the empath picks up the sword or walks away from the altar, when the narcissist removes the crown and kneels before the fire, then you know the psyche is healing, because these images are not fiction. They are the language of the unconscious, and they tell us what the ego cannot admit, that we are mythic beings walking through archetypal landscapes, repeating sacred stories until we remember who we are. So let me ask you, not as a scientist, but as a soul traveler, what role have you been playing, and is it still true? Are you ready to lay down the mask? The wound, the endless story of not enough. Can you turn, not away from the pain, but toward it, and ask, what are you trying to teach me? Because beneath the narcissist's illusion, beneath the empath's exhaustion, there is something deeper still, the self, silent, watching, waiting, not to punish you, but to awaken you. When we meet again in here, we shall enter the symbolic path forward, the path of boundaries as sacred ritual, of dreams as teachers, and of love not as sacrifice, but as sovereignty. We will begin the slow, luminous return to self-possession. But for now, take this with you. The wound was never your fault, but the healing, it is your responsibility. The mirror has cracked. Now it is time to look not at your reflection, but through it. Now that the mirror has cracked, what remains is not emptiness, but clarity. And yet, clarity, when first encountered, can feel cruel. For when the illusion breaks, we are not left with bliss, we are left with rawness, with the sheer exposure of having lived in a pattern that no longer serves the self. The empath, standing amidst the shards of what they once called love, may feel lost, but that sense of loss is sacred. It is the dissolution of a false identity, and from this dissolution, something far more enduring can begin. We must now speak of boundaries, not as walls, but as rituals of sacred containment. The empath, so long identified with openness, often fears that to say no is to become cold, selfish, or cruel. But this fear is the residue of a wound where boundaries were punished, not honored. In truth, a boundary is not rejection, it is revelation. It reveals what you value, what you need, what you are willing to hold, and what you must release to remain whole. The narcissist, unable to tolerate true boundaries, will test them. They will frame your limits as betrayal, your new as abandonment. And it is in that moment that the empath is faced with the ancient question: do I betray myself to preserve the connection, or do I risk the loss to remain true? The path of individuation demands the second. To become whole is to lose the false safety of codependency and to stand trembling, perhaps, but firm in the presence of your own soul. To say, I am not here to be consumed, I am here to exist fully, not as a balm, not as a reflection, but as a being with sacred interiority. There is immense grief in this process, and we must not rush it. We grieve not only the person we must let go of, but the fantasy they represented, the idea that they would one day see us, love us, transform because of us. But fantasies, no matter how beautiful, are prisons when they require our self-abandonment. In one case, I recall a patient who dreamt of being in a glass house surrounded by people applauding her beauty. But the moment she turned to speak, her voice shattered the glass and everyone vanished. She wept at the dream's cruelty, but I told her that was not cruelty, that was truth. The applause was conditional. The love was for your silence, not your soul. And now you are free to speak, even if the house must fall. This is the moment of rebirth, the moment the empath begins to differentiate presence from performance. You see, true empathy is not the act of absorbing another's pain. It is the presence to witness it without drowning in it. To feel with, not for, to remain rooted in the self while attuned to the other. This is mature empathy, sacred empathy, embodied compassion. It has boundaries like a riverbank, without which the water becomes a flood. And this brings us to the dream work, the secret doorway into the unconscious that the waking mind cannot pass. In dreams, the truth always finds a way to reveal itself, though often in strange and symbolic forms. The narcissist may appear as a glittering figure who promises power but steals your name. The empath may appear as a tree struck by lightning, still standing but hollow. These images are not meant to be interpreted with logic, but with feeling. They are invitations to dialogue with the self. When an empath dreams of being devoured, they are often dreaming of their own giving. Nature turned against them when they dream of flying. They may be glimpsing the part of themselves unburdened by other people's expectations. These are not mere illusions, they are blueprints for becoming. They show what the ego cannot yet claim, that you are already more than you've allowed yourself to be. In the analytic space, when I asked my patients to stay with a dream image, say a lion, pacing behind the cage, they would often begin to weep, not because of fear, but because they recognized the lion. It was their anger, their power, their forbidden self, and to see it, to stay with it, without fleeing, was the beginning of freedom. The narcissist, too, has dreams, though fewer. Recall them in the rare moments they do. I've heard dreams of collapsing buildings, of voices calling from locked rooms, of standing on stages where no one claps. These too are messages. The persona is crumbling. The unconscious cries out, not to be admired, but to be known. And this is a work not to destroy the narcissist, not to worship the empath, but to retrieve the inner figures each has disowned and to begin the sacred task of reintegration. Let us not forget that even the narcissist was once a child, sensitive, impressionable, hungry for affection. But somewhere along the way, they learned that vulnerability was a liability, and so they buried it, building layers of performance around a raw, untouched center. Their confidence is not truth, it is compensation. Their manipulation is not strategy, it is survival. This does not excuse harm, but it does help us understand the architecture of the pattern. Understanding, however, does not require proximity. You can have compassion from a distance. You can wish someone healing without offering your body as their bandage. The empath must learn this difference between being love and being fuel. For when you are fuel, you are consumed, but when you are love, you are sovereign. You radiate not to be accepted, but because it is your nature. You offer presence, not performance, and in this state, the narcissist cannot control you, because their power was never over you, but over your unhealed belief that you needed them to feel whole. And so we return again to the archetypes. The empath who has reclaimed their shadow becomes the priestess, the sage, the wild one, the one who holds space without being drained by it. And the narcissist, if they ever turn inward, may become the redeemed king, the sacred warrior, the seer, but only if they are willing to feel the grief they've buried beneath the mask. This is the work of our time, not just to analyze, but to alchemize, to take these repeating patterns and turn them into paths, to stop asking, why do they treat me this way? And start asking, what part of me still believes this is love? The self, your true center, is not wounded by rejection. It is not fragmented by endings. It is vast. ancient and whole, and it longs not for perfection, but for integration. That is why the Narcissist was sent to awaken you, not destroy you, to reveal where your boundaries were porous, where your self-worth was borrowed, where your silence became survival. And so now you are asked to choose, not them, you to choose your wholeness over your role, to choose your soul over the story, to choose discomfort over self-betrayal. This choice is not loud, it is quiet. It happens in the body before it happens in words. It happens when you feel the old compulsion rising and do not obey. When we return, we shall conclude this journey with the final integration, how to walk forward in wholeness, how to transmute the wound into wisdom, and how to embody the sacred archetype of the self-possessed empath. No longer prey to the unconscious designs of others, but a conscious co-creator of your own psychic architecture. But before that, I leave you here in this in-between space, the mirror broken, the illusion burnt, the old self dissolving. Listen to what rises from the silence. That is your guide now. Now that you stand at the threshold, no longer dreaming but awakening, it is important to remember the path forward is not a straight line, it is a spiral descending and rising again and again through the same symbols, the same wounds, but each time from a higher place within. The patterns may reappear, the faces may change, but you will not be the same. For once the unconscious becomes conscious, it cannot be unseen. That is the quiet power of awareness. It changes nothing and yet transforms everything. Let us walk together for a final moment into the great architecture of the self. This self, in its fullness, contains the light and the dark, the masculine and the feminine, the sacred and the profane. It does not seek perfection, it seeks totality. It is not polite, it does not bow to the rules of the persona. It will wreck your relationships. If they are false, it will disturb your sleep if you are lying to yourself. It will break your heart not to harm you, but to open the chamber where your soul has been hidden all along. This is what happened when the Narcissist entered your life. They were not a punishment, they were a mirror cracked. Yes, but reflecting back a deeper truth. You had forgotten yourself, not because you are weak, but because, like all wounded empaths, you were once a child who had to become light in order to survive the darkness, and you did so brilliantly. You became the listener, the healer, the intuitive guide, but no one told you that you were allowed to keep some of that light for yourself. No one told you that your boundaries were holy. No one told you that your rage was sacred. No one told you that your worth was not transactional. And so you gave and gave and gave until you mistook your own depletion for compassion. Until your nervous system learned to call anxiety connection, until your inner child began whispering, "If I am enough, they will love me." But now, you see the pattern not as destiny, but as design. And in seeing you are free, to live as a conscious empath is to become an alchemist of energy. It is to know when something belongs to you and when it does not. It is to feel deeply, but to choose wisely. It is to stop confusing guilt with responsibility and silence with peace. It is to know that love is not proved by endurance, that love without reciprocity is not love. It is self-abandonment dressed in spiritual clothing, and yes, there will still be grief, a deep, aching grief that comes not just from the loss of another, but from the parts of yourself you sacrifice to keep them. You may find yourself mourning years spent in confusion, compassion offered to the unready, loyalty given to those who did not honor it. Let yourself grieve. Let yourself weep, not only for what was done to you, but for what you did to yourself in the name of love, and then slowly let that grief become gold. That is the alchemy. The very pain that brought you to your knees will teach you to walk in your own power. The parts of you that were humiliated, dismissed, exploited, these are the parts that now become your guardians, your truth tellers, your sacred witnesses. You need not fear the shadow anymore. It does not seek to destroy you. It only wants to be known. I often said that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. This is the work you've begun. You have entered the cave. You have looked into the face of the manipulator and seen your own reflection. You have peeled back the mask of the Savior and found the aching child beneath. You have sat beside your own shame, your own unmet need, and begun to listen. And now you begin to live not reactively, not as a wound in search of a healer, but as a being in contact with their own inner cosmos. You do not need a narcissist to awaken. You do not need another collapse to teach you. You can choose yourself daily, gently, relentlessly. You begin by listening, truly, listening to your inner yes and your inner no. You begin by noticing where your body tightens, where your breath shortens, where your spirit contracts. You begin by refusing to negotiate your intuition for someone else's comfort. You begin by remembering that peace is not the absence of conflict, it is the presence of truth. You begin, most of all, by remembering that you are not here to be chosen, you are here to choose. That is what the narcissist never understood. That power is not control, that love is not worship, that intimacy cannot be forced or faked, but you who once mistook caretaking for connection, you understand now. You see the game for what it is. You feel the manipulation as a tremor in your gut. You do not override it. You do not apologize for your perception. You trust it because you trust you. And what of love? Yes, love remains, but now it flows in both directions. Now it is held by structure, by sovereignty, by mutual regard. You will find that when you no longer allow your light to be stolen, the right ones will come to stand beside it, not to feed off it, but to honor it. They will not be drawn to your pain, but to your presence. and you will not call the chaos familiar, you will call it gone. This is what it means to walk with the self. You are no longer ruled by compulsion, nor seduced by fantasy. You can look at the person who once held you hostage in a web of projection and say, I see you, I release you, I reclaim me. And if the narcissist appears again, and they will, in different forms, you will not shrink, you will not forget, you will not fall, because you are not the same. You are not the empath who waits to be validated. You are the soul who sees through the spell. In ancient alchemy, there was a phrase, solve et coagula, dissolve and recombine. This is what you have done. The pattern has dissolved, the identity has broken, and now the self begins to coagulate, not as the old story, but as a new being, one who feels deeply, but does not bleed for the unready, one who listens, but no longer absorbs what is not theirs, one who gives, but also receives, one who has made peace with their own darkness and therefore cannot be manipulated by the darkness of others. This is the true healing, not in fixing the narcissist, but in remembering yourself. And now, my final invitation to you is not to seek more answers, but to dwell in the space where answers become silence. In that silence, something ancient stirs, a knowing older than language, a truth written not in words, but in symbols. You may see it in a dream, in a passing image, in a memory that rises like mist from a forgotten field. Do not rush to interpret it. Let it speak, let it teach, let it become the thread that leads you home. And when you arrive, you will find that home was never outside of you. It was in your body, in your boundaries, in your voice, in your stillness. You were never here to save them. You were here to return to you. And that, dear soul, is the end of the spell. Let it break, let it breathe, let it bless. Go now, not as the empath who was chosen, but as the one who now chooses. Choose wisely, choose truth. Choose you